Hello, everyone, and welcome to the real effective answers for life with your host, Tammy and Tara, where we deal with real people, real life, and real answers for the taboo life issues that many refuse to address. And we are so very excited about the discussions planned and pray that with each one, it will bring insight, hope, healing, and freedom as we all remember to keep it real so God can deal and we can heal. Welcome, everyone. I am Tammy,
And I'm Tara.
and we want to welcome you once again to the real effective answers for life.
And Domestic Violence Awareness Month is over, but the abuse that people are enduring is not. So we are going to be diving into more information after talking a bit about our stories and some information that we shared previously about domestic abuse. We're going to be diving into the types of domestic abuse that are experienced today.
Yes, absolutely. And we're going to try to navigate through these uh, as quickly as possible because it is quite extensive, tragically and unfortunately. However, we want to try to be as thorough as possible in addressing what abuse actually looks like. And so the first segment that we're going to talk about is physical abuse or physical harm. Because it doesn't always have to leave a mark. And so, one of the things, of course, we know is someone that causes harm or damage or any type of pain that can come through kicking, hitting, pushing, grabbing, biting, and of course, even the more severe. Um, I guess I'm trying to think of the right word because it can all be severe, but even I guess the more extreme, even going into strangulation.
Yeah, and one thing that I've found really interesting in doing my research regarding strangulation is the fact that that is the one thing that is the highest predictor of mortality in the future. So if they will put their hands around your neck and strangle you, some people call it choking, but that's not choking. Choking is when you go to swallow something and something goes down the wrong pipe. That is not choking. Strangulation is when somebody is putting their hands around your neck or something around your neck to keep you from being able to breathe. And that is the highest predictor that in the future there will be a homicide. And so, that is one that I definitely like to bring out because so often people um, don't take that as seriously as they should. And sometimes strangulation leaves marks and sometimes it does not. So, as with any of the other types of physical abuse that you could experience, strangulation may or may not be something that people could visibly see.
Yes, absolutely. Or and even not only even like strangulation, but even just I feel like just any type of force to where it's relating to your neck or it's relating to a vital part of your body that could cause potential death. I've even had where my neck was turned um almost like as if I don't know how to explain it, almost like as if by the grace of God, my neck was not snapped. So technically, it was not strangulation, if you will. And thank God that I really feel like it was the grace of God and God sovereignly protecting me in that. Because even thinking about it now, I get overwhelmed thinking about the fact that it was literally, I feel like the intervention of God for me because my neck could have been snapped.
Yeah.
Uh, just the strangulation obviously when to prevent breathing, but then any type of I just feel like any type of especially when you're dealing with a person's neck and you're dealing with that's an area where you know that they're breathing and that there's the potential for cutting off their life,
Right.
uh, definitely or definitely that's definitely to me an indicator that, as you already stated, that the potential for homicide is there. If they are that out of control or that controlling to go to that extreme, that's an indicator that you might really want to reconsider that relationship or getting help immediately.
Yeah, and I know like two of the favorite things that my former abuser liked to do was strangulation and then also smothering. So whether he used his hands or a pillow or whatever he could get his hands on, and then cover my mouth and my nose so that I couldn't breathe. So that goes along with that, lack of oxygen is a problem. So that would be another form of physical harm, of course. And sometimes people don't think of things, such as being forcibly fed or having food withheld as a form of control, and physical harm. So even things such as that may not initially come to people's mind when you're thinking about physical harm, are types of physical abuse.
Absolutely. I would agree with you 300%. Especially, which we'll get into that later, but because part of that can come under the guise of I'm trying to help you. I want you to be healthy, and so therefore I'm withholding your food. Or, you're not eating enough, so I'm going to force you to eat food. Um, then of course there's also the inappropriate and unlawful use of restraint.
Mhm.
Unauthorized restraint meaning like restricting movement in any way, binding them, tying yourself up. Well, not tying yourself up, but being tied up, your hands being tied up, your feet being tied up, handcuffed.
Or
What
even
that person?
pinned.
Yes, yes, being
Yeah.
pinned, definitely.
Yeah, that's something that can still be a trigger. Like the penning portion, even, healing's a journey as you go through this process. And so, people have experienced different things, so different things can come up as a trigger. And so, that is definitely one of mine where, even if somebody is just doing something silly with me for a minute or whatever, if I feel like I'm being pinned, that can trigger that flight type of response, trauma response out of me. And with a lot of these, they're very physical to where you can see certain things that have happened at times, whether, it's leaving bruises and or scratches or cuts or broken bones or black eyes. A lot of people think of that stuff when you're thinking about physical harm, but some of these, like we said, people aren't going to be able to see them, but that doesn't make them less harmful to you, if people are using these as a way to harm you or control you. And even right down to somebody trying to intentionally make you feel uncomfortable. So they know you're cold and they open the window in the winter or turn up the air conditioning or take your covers to try to make you even more uncomfortable to get you to do whatever it is that they're wanting you to do, as a means of physical control in order to you need something to stop or to get a need met, whether that's warmth or whatever it is that they may be withholding. And so they use that as control in order to make you obey or do what it is that they want. So that's also another way of physically causing harm.
Yes, and then I would think a last thing that would kind of go under restraint, not only like that physical contact of restraint, but even, being restrained within a room, being
Mhm.
confined with certain space or being locked up to where you cannot get out,
Yeah,
without form of abuse,
right.
especially being done as a method of control and
Mhm.
keeping uh, in a certain space or place without your consent or against your will.
Right. There's another aspect of abuse that a lot of people think of just as they think of the physical abuse, probably first and foremost when they're thinking of domestic abuse. The physical first comes to mind. Sometimes that second thing would be sexual abuse. And there are many beliefs, and different laws out there about if you are married to someone, whether something can be considered rape. In today's context of what we are talking about, we are going to be addressing that as if you are being pressured or if there's physical force, then that is rape. So that is a situation to where your choice and your will is being removed, and therefore it is against your will, just as in any other situation. If you weren't married, that would be considered rape. And there were people who asked me, they were like, "Weren't you married part of the times when he raped you? Like, how could he rape you? You were his wife." When you have a gun in your mouth, or
Mhm.
you're being strangled while you're being raped, or smothered while you're being raped, or just being pressured. Like we talked about, it doesn't have to be that physical. You could be um, being forced in other ways, maybe not physically forced, but all of that is rape. And as I explain some of that force that's used, then people are like, "Oh, yeah, that's different." But really, it doesn't have to go to that extent to be considered sexually abusive.
No, it doesn't. I mean, even just the very fact that, just because you're married and, obviously, sure, you're married and, as husband and wife, that's a part of the marriage, and just as we're talking about sexual abuse, in terms of forcing it, there's also the abuse of withholding it intentionally as a form of punishment or method of
Mhm.
control. But by the same token, you may not always be in the mood. You may not always feel like that in that moment. You may not be feeling well. Maybe you all have had an argument and you haven't resolved those differences. And so to then turn around and because you're angry and because you already know when you've hurt someone's feelings, when there's tension and there's animosity. And so then to purposely just as another layer of trying to exercise dominance, you then try to force that, and that person saying, no, I'm not in that space right now, or I don't feel like it, I'm not in the mood, whatever the reason may be, married or not, you need to respect that that no is no.
Yeah, yeah, I
So,
agree. And that kind of goes along with something else I was thinking about, and that's when somebody pressures you to do things that you're uncomfortable doing,
mhm,
and that pressure's there. You feel like you're punished if you try to say no. So you feel like you have to, depending on what type of punishments you may receive, and weighing all that out. Anytime it's not, in today's society, as you go around and teach students, for instance, in school about rape, you teach the fact that if it's not an emphatic yes, it's a no.
abs-
So, um, same goes for, if you're wanting to try something that that person is not comfortable with. If it is not an emphatic yes, then it's a no.
yes,
And they shouldn't feel punished, or, that you're upset with them because that's not something they're comfortable with.
or made to feel like they're less than, or made to feel like, what kind of man are you, or what kind of woman are you, or
Right.
made to feel like you're just less than because you're not willing to do whatever it is that that other person is wanting to do. It's very wrong, and then, or even purposely, even comparing them then to, well, so and so would have done it, or previous, my previous, encounters, male or female, would do this, that type of thing, and comparing them to someone else. That's not, it's not direct, I guess, sexual abuse, if you will, but it would kind of go to the psychological side of comparing them to someone else and making them feel like belittling them and making them
Yeah.
feel like they're less than because they're not willing
Right.
to do what it is that you're wanting to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and you talked a bit already about, them using sex as a weapon at different times, and as a method of making you submit, when things, you may not be in the right space, or the arguments. And so, there's lots of ways that they can use sex as punishment when it should be something that is a beautiful thing between the couple. And that goes right into another aspect, and that's using sexual photography or forced use of pornography during your sexual encounters with them as well. People should feel like they have a choice, again, with the sexual photography when it comes to their partner. And anytime there's a use of being forced to watch pornography, there's typically going to be other aspects of sexual abuse occurring as well.
Absolutely. Even to the just even like with regards to, and you've already touched on it pretty much, just the photography and then the pornography as well, which kind of goes back to the doing things that you don't feel comfortable, because
Right.
I know some that's even, sometimes ideologies or ideas of trying things come from using like the pornography, watching
Absolutely.
the and if that other person isn't comfortable with that and they're not comfortable with watching the pornography, they're not comfortable with bringing that into the bedroom, and then to try to force that or to force them to watch those things, that too is a form of psychological and sexual abuse if you're trying to force them to do the things that you've encountered or seen in that video or that, pornographic video.
Right. Yeah. And
And
you're talking about the go ahead.
well, because look at, a couple of things, like when we were talking about one, the submission side, and I'm bringing this from the church side of things. um you know the submission thing, where it's you're not supposed to withhold sex from one another. And and so sometimes, a lot of times in the church you will hear that, um and a lot of times it is then used as the weapon, because especially depending on what your belief system is, it's used as a weapon because it's, oh well, you're my wife and you're not supposed to withhold sex, or you're my husband and you're not supposed to withhold sex,
Right.
knowing the previous harm and damage that you've caused by your
Yeah.
conversation or your prior interactions. And then also, even with regards to the pornography side of it, and with regards to the church, because some people will try to use, in the Bible where it talks about that the marriage bed is undefiled, and meaning that everything is legal within the confinements of the wedding and the marriage bed. But it becomes defiled when you bring other elements into that marriage bed that are not godly and that are not something that you and your spouse are in agreement with, and especially something like pornography, because then you're not just bringing you and your spouse into that bedroom, but you're also bringing in that pornography and the whole spirit of that, the spirit of perversion that often comes along with it is also
Right.
being invited in your bedroom.
Right. And I was thinking too, another aspect of this that can be used is unfaithfulness.
Hmm.
Because as people are unfaithful, and then turning around and possibly making you feel guilty about struggling to do certain things while you're trying to heal or go through that process, that can also turn into that. It's not always a form of abuse, but it could turn into a form of abuse. So if you have somebody that you're in a partnership with and they are utilizing that as a weapon, it could even be part of the abuse where, um, for instance, if you don't do these things, I'll find somebody who will.
Yeah,
And
yes,
so that's another aspect that is very abusive. And that gets into the psychological abuse as well,
manipulate.
which we've already started touching on. And we've talked about how, if they are trying to utilize these things against you in a way to coerce you to make you do the things that they want you to do, that is abuse.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more in terms of, and I've even had someone to indirectly try that with me. And I thank God at that time that we were in the dating stages. And it didn't last long because just God I allowed protected me from that, allowed me to discern some things concerning that individual. But I can even remember like a conversation, because at one point they were, and I still, they may have still been into pornography because they didn't see anything wrong with it and had never been challenged about it. Or and I can even remember, well, that's why a lot of people end up divorced, or that's why you have a lot of people in the church. And I even know of people, and I mean, this is this person talking to me, and I even know of a person, or a lot of guys where the wives are thinking everything's fine, and God's healed their marriage, and the husband and pressuring them to do things that they don't want to do anymore. And what they don't know is that their husband is sleeping around with someone else who will. And I can very plainly remember telling them, well, if that were the case for me, he can keep it moving. He can go to that someone, and he doesn't even have to sneak away to do it. I'll help him. I will take him to her.
Right.
Just in me. you
Right.
know, like, no, you're not going to. That's wrong, and it's just wrong to use that as a threat, because
Yeah.
again, if that's where your heart is, and if that means that much to you and you value that over that person, or that much over that person, then you don't need to be with them. And quite frankly, to whomever's being threatened with it, you need to know that your worth is more than that. And if that's
Absolutely.
their level of value for you, is that if you don't do what they want in that regard, then they can toss you aside, or you're easily tossed aside or replaced, or they can just go do it with someone else, then maybe you need to let them go do that.
Right.
Maybe you should.
Yeah. 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 Because your value doesn't come from that. So if they're starting to make you feel like that's the case, then it's it's your value is very precious. So you don't want to allow somebody to make you feel devalued because of things like that.
Or to
Um,
based off of that.
right,
Yes.
right. Um, and more about the psychological or mental and emotional types of abuse that you can experience anytime you are being prevented your expression of choice, or your opinion, being able to be yourself, being able to say how you feel, have discussions about important things that are important to you, all of those types of things. If you don't feel that that is something that you can do and you're safe in doing so, there's some psychological abuse that's going on.
Absolutely. And I can definitely relate to this one. And it manifests in, you're having a conversation. And as long as you're agreeing with that person, beautiful, wonderful conversation. But the minute that you disagree with that person, or you have an opinion opposite of that person's, then all of a sudden chaos breaks loose. Or it's that constant, trying to pressure you into seeing things their way, or trying to get you to bend to see things their way. And sometimes it doesn't even always have to be a like flat on confrontation, argument, debate. Although sometimes that is a part of it as well. You say any As long as you're doing and saying what they want, you're fine. But the minute that you disagree, then all of a sudden there is either one, they're literally hounding you, constantly trying to get you to change your mind, or to get you to see why you're wrong. That is a form of psychological abuse, that because it's saying, that you have no right, you have no feelings, you have no emotions, that you are not an individual, you're not allowed to think outside of everyone else, or outside of their realm of what they allow you to think. And that is definitely a form of psychological abuse. It can
Yeah.
manifest in out shouting you, or out talking you, or over talking you as you're
Mhm.
having discussion and you're sharing your differences of opinion. It can manifest, and all of a sudden they don't want to talk to you now because you disagree with them. So they give you the silent treatment. And
Yeah.
then retreat and turn around and take back what you said. Or, oh, well, maybe I do see it your way, knowing good and well you don't. But just for the sake of keeping peace, and just for the sake of preventing an argument, or preventing that person from not talking to you, or preventing that person from going off and going off on the deep end, you shy away from saying how you really feel, or you
Right.
never communicate how you feel at all.
Yeah, and there can be those outbursts of anger and, the big mood swings and things like that that occur anytime there's a disagreement as well. And they use that a lot to cause some sort of fear. And that can include things like, talking down to you or yelling at you. You talked about people putting you down and comparing you to other people. Even we were just talking about the sexual aspects and the sexual abuse, but they can put you down and compare you to others in other aspects as well. And
Absolutely.
relationships should be a safe place. If you have somebody that you consider yourself to be in a relationship with, and this can even go with friendships, then it should be a safe place for you to have these conversations, and have disagreements and have your own opinions, without being afraid.
Absolutely. You should be able to be you.
Right.
That includes feel. You know, there's also like the intimidation or the uh,
Mhm.
threatening harm to the individual themselves or to the children or to the pets or to that person's, parents or someone else that's
Right.
closer, threatening to, call their job, uh,
Mhm.
or call their employer or come up to their place of employment. Obviously, those are also forms of psychological and mental, emotional harm as well. Is when you threaten a person with the intention of intimidating them, and
Right.
whether like I said, just threatening to come on their job or threatening, say maybe something about that person that they've shared with you in confidence. And, maybe it was something that happened when they were younger, wrong choices that they made or whatever. They're feeling that they're in a safe space with you, or so they thought. They share this with you. And then when angry, you threaten to expose them concerning those things, or
Right.
you use those things and you lord those things over them to bend them to do what you want them to do. You
Yeah.
know, and if they disagree, oh well, don't forget I know such and such, or don't forget
Mhm.
this. That's also a form of psychological and mental abuse, or even just not allowing them to forget that. you
Right.
know so they're in a place where they've moved past that. They're in a happy space, they've moved on,
Mhm.
in a different space. And as a form of control and keeping them under your thumb or under your control, you're constantly reminding them of those negative things. You're
Yeah.
constantly reminding them of the negative things that they used to do, or you knew them when, but that was then, not
Right.
now. So even using things like that as a method of keeping them feeling like they're not qualified or they're not worthy or they don't deserve to be happy or they don't deserve to be in a certain space
Mhm.
of something that they did 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. And sometimes they'll even threaten to abandon you. Like nobody else is going to want you. So if you don't do what I want, you're going to be alone because nobody's going to love you like me, or nobody's going to want you because of this, this, and that. Um, that, they could do that. They could threaten that psychologically, but they can also um, really leave you someplace and try to make you feel like you don't have anybody that you can call for help, and you're scared and you don't know where you are. And so, whether they're threatening that abandonment or really leaving you someplace abandoned, to try to teach you a lesson and make you feel like they are the ones that are there for you, and they're the only ones that can help. So, you need to be appreciative and do what they want. Um, that's a whole other form of psychological abuse.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That, and then also dealing with, which that would kind of go to the isolation side, and
Mhm.
when about making you feel like they're the only ones that you
Right.
have. And so, and I can remember, definitely times of, basically being made to feel like, well, who's going to want you, who's going to want to, a divorced woman with 4 kids, who's going to want you, your used goods or your damaged goods. So certainly I can speak to that for sure.
Right.
Because sometimes in that state, you begin to believe that lie. So then it makes you decide, to cling to them more. You know what I mean? Or even just that isolation of, well, that's a different topic that we can discuss in a second, because that was one of the areas. But just when you mentioned that about the abandoning thing too, I
Yeah.
thought that can couple with the isolation.
Yeah.
Um, if, when you were stating how they make you feel like they're the only ones that's there for
Mhm.
you. And especially if they know that, you've had to come from a dysfunctional space or
Right.
dysfunctional previous abusive situations,
Yeah.
then they paint themselves as the hero.
Right.
Well, who are you going to run to? You can't go.
Hmm.
So who else do you have, or where else are you going to go?
Yeah, and a lot of times before they get that direct, there's a lot of manipulation going on beforehand where they're like doing, that you may or may not have heard of love bombing before, where they are just like completely and engulfing you with love and with gifts and with generosity and being super attentive and all of these types of things. But it's really only in an effort to try to build that trust, build that bond. You know, they talk about trauma bonds, and this is how it's formed. They want to be the hero. They want to be the one that you look to that did all these great things for you, so that when they turn around and do the bad things to you, it's hard for you to kind of reconcile that in your brain. It's hard for you to look at it and not have thoughts of, well, there's good times too. And you know, he's good to me most of the time, like everything's really good most of the time, or she's good to me most of the time. So then you start trying to find ways to get back to that, rather than identifying the fact that you are enduring abuse and that you don't deserve that.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I truly could not agree more because and that's one of the things too. A lot of times people, having never been in an abusive situation, sometimes I know the first thing they ask is, well, how could you stay in that? And
Mhm.
even sometimes the abuser themselves will tauntingly, well, if I'm really that bad, why are you still with
Right.
me? Reality, and even for the abuser anyway, they know that the answer is because of the love bombing that you did. It's
Yeah.
because things were not always this bad, or I probably would not have been with you. Had you started
Yeah.
off like now, I wouldn't have given you a second thought. But
Right.
this started out. And so
Yeah.
it's after the love bombing, and then the bond is formed, and you begin to really love, think that person is that. And then when you begin to see who they really are,
Yeah.
that is that easy to walk away because that bond is now there, because you did not see that initially starting off. Who in their right mind would walk into a situation like that?
Right. And
No.
oftentimes they'll start gaslighting you at that point when they realize that you're starting to identify certain things. They will try to make you feel like what you're remembering or what you're feeling isn't actually what's occurring. Like you were too sensitive. They didn't mean for something to be that way. Like you took it the wrong way. Or, you know, I don't know how you could possibly feel this way when this is actually all that I've done for you, and this is how you should be feeling. And so they start gaslighting you so that you begin questioning yourself.
uh,
Like, okay, I think part of the one of the most tormenting parts of abuse is when you're in that limbo of questioning yourself. You're realizing some things, but you're questioning, like, okay, am I being too harsh? Am I looking at something the wrong way? Am I
am I being emotional, if you
right?
will? Oh,
Yeah.
oh
So
yeah,
just trying to weed through that, but that's where that gaslighting is such a strong
it is.
mechanism, a strong tool of that abuse and that control. Because if they can get you to constantly be battling even within yourself, it's easy for them to continue what they're doing.
Oh, you absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That is, oh, well, that's not, you're just overreacting. I didn't mean it that way. You
Mhm.
took it the wrong way. You heard me the wrong way. Oh my goodness. That for me just drives me bonkers at this point,
Yeah.
because I was controlled by it at one point in time. And
Right.
now that God has delivered me through that, and He has helped me to like clearly discern, no, this is not me. I'm not backing down. You're not going to, convince me otherwise.
Right.
Uh, like when I see it now, that is like for me, that is a trigger. Because I'm like, even if I just the slight little hint of saying, "Oh, well, I think you're being emotional," and sometimes I have to check myself so that I don't become emotional, because it's like,
Right.
no, because there are times reality when I am being emotional. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm, and that on real too. And
Right.
so, but just hearing those words though, I'm like, don't go there with me,
Yeah.
because you know what I mean? That is a trigger. When you talk about triggers, sometimes that is a trigger for me.
Right.
Because even if I am emotional, and maybe I am at times, we may very well be overreacting. That's the reality of life sometimes, but it still doesn't negate how you feel. And so, even if those are, even if I am being emotional in that moment, or maybe overreacting to something in that moment, it still doesn't negate how that person may have made me feel, or I guess, so because we all have those moments of overreacting, we all have those moments of misunderstanding something, bad day, whatever the circumstance might be, but it still does not negate that maybe you did do something that hurt their feelings, or you said something that hurt their feelings, or you did something that they felt was disrespectful, or whatever the case might be. And so to dismiss it, just, to immediately say, oh, you're just being emotional, um, is very dismissive, and it can definitely be a form of gaslighting, especially if you don't want to hear it, especially if you're not trying to hear what they're saying. And I think also it just made me think of, when you talk about gaslighting too, projection, because that is another method of gaslighting.
Yeah.
You tell that person about something that they did to offend you, and they immediately rebuttal, well, but you. And it's like they never take accountability for their own behavior, but they're constantly flipping it back on you,
Yeah.
or they acted the way that they did because of you. You triggered it, or you caused them to act that way. I think those are other areas of gaslighting as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Um, and something else that was thinking about while you were talking about that was just sometimes in that gaslighting and that effort to maintain control, one of the tools that they will utilize is neglect. We talked about that a little bit in the sexual
Mhm.
abuse aspect, but even just the psychological impact that that has. Maybe they a, and I'm sorry, I can't speak.
And
Intentionally, that's the word I couldn't get out. And they intentionally leave you alone if you need assistance with something, or they don't help provide for basic needs that typically, you would be needing to have taken care of, or preventing you from taking care of your basic needs. That's an aspect of that too, or not taking account of different needs that you may have that may be outside of the relationship, whether that's hobbies or exercise, different recreational things that you would do, or maybe you want to go to school and things like that, and preventing you from meeting some of the basic needs that you have, and some of the needs that we have to grow and to thrive, is part of neglect when they are not helping you along that way, or being supportive of you along that way. So neglect can look different. It can look like the things that we think of, by maybe not showing you love, or maybe not talking to you, like you were talking about earlier, because they're upset about something. So they're neglecting you in an effort to make you feel badly, or not have something taken care of, so that then you'll do what they want. You'll understand that there's a punishment that comes with not doing what they want. Or it can look like not allowing you to do the things, and supporting you to do the things that help you grow as a human being. So neglect is another major way of that they can psychologically abuse.
Oh, absolutely. And then one last thing that I think of with regards to the psychological side, although that's an exhaustive topic, but just hitting some of the core areas, is we were trying to think of the word and we could not figure it out, you all. But just it's and I'll probably think of it after the podcast. But it's like joking, but it's like what you call, I guess, modern vernacular, taking digs or taking pot shots, or, but there's another term, because it's not as, if somebody say you're taking a dig or a pot shot, I mean, that's kind of more direct. But this is more like where they're putting you down, quote unquote, joking, but it's a constant negative joking.
Right.
Um, Once in a while, yeah, we all slip them in there where we're cracking on each other and you're having fun, whatever. And that's, just part of interacting and having fun. But when it's a constant putting you down, or a constant belittlement, all in the name of joking,
Mm,
but is almost in a sense of keeping you in check, if you will.
yeah.
reminding you of your place, if you will.
Mhm.
Quote unquote, I'm just joking, but you're joking at someone else's expense and
Yeah,
everyone else is laughing, but the person that you're making fun of is not laughing.
yeah,
That's joking. That's beyond the realm of joking because you are belittling that person or you're being belittled, I should say. And so being aware of that as well, sometimes especially when it's a constant uh negativity and you begin to it causes you to feel less than or it causes you to kind of don't dismiss that,
yeah,
don't dismiss because there's 9 times out of 10 sometimes that can be being passive aggressive and it starts off quote unquote as joking but can very easily transition to just flat out verbal assault.
yeah.
You know
And it may not even be constant. It could be something where they know something that you are self-conscious about, or
Definitely.
something that has been hurtful to you in the past. And so maybe if it's not even constant, it could be specific to those areas to try to make a big impact, even in like very, it might not be all the time. It could
Yeah.
be, sporadic. That's the word I was looking for. We're not doing really good with thinking of words
Oh,
tonight. So, it could be sporadic where they're doing that, but it's still very, very harmful because they're doing it with intention. So that's a possibility too.
absolutely. Absolutely. And then of course, there's we've dealt with the physical and the sexual and the psychological, but there's also the financial and that's an area where very honestly prior to doing this podcast, although I've lived it, you don't always think of when you think of the word abuse. Oftentimes that's not the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Um, but it's the controlling of the finances.
And
Um,
I don't think it gets talked about enough because I think it is a huge power move for abusers. Because if they can control the finances and if they can keep you from having those types of resources, and we'll go through some of the ways that that happens, but if they can prevent you from having those resources, you can't really do anything in life without
correct.
finances at this point. So where are you going to go? How are you going to take care of yourself? How are you going to take care of, if you have kids? Um, so if they can control the finances, they can potentially keep you stuck forever, even though, we want to make sure that you're aware as we're going through these discussions that there are resources outside of resources that will help you. So if they're controlling the resources, will help you find some other ones. But that is a big power move in trying to keep you stuck, is utilizing the control of finances. And I know, with my situation, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm saying especially with children.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Mhm.
with my situation, I had the two kids. Um, he prevented me from working for a time period, because he made things very difficult for me to be able to work. And so then he was controlling all the finances. But then when he saw that I was, loved being with my babies and being able to take care of them, then it was, oh, you have to go to work, but you can only work part time because that wouldn't be enough resources for me to do much with, but it would keep me from, being able to be with my boys the whole time. But, I wasn't allowed to go to the grocery store even by myself. He controlled every aspect of the finances down to specifically my birthday money. If I received birthday money, he would take my birthday money. He got credit cards in my name and, purchased very high priced items on those cards. And then when I was able to leave him, he filed for bankruptcy. So I was stuck with all of this debt that I didn't even know I had. And so there's a lot of different ways that people can control and abuse through financial means.
Absolutely. Which speaks to what you were just speaking about, opening up debt and accounts in your name. And then, even whether with you or once you separate, then it's set up to where you take the blame or you take the fall because of it.
Right.
also think about in terms of the finances and, not only like taking your money, but even, sometimes even trying to prevent finances from coming in,
Mhm.
trying to prevent you. I mean, I can remember when I was interviewing for a job and, my ex-husband did not want me to have the job in the first place, but, and so that he didn't look just total, you know, he took me. He knew I had to interview. I'm upstairs, I'm interviewing. I got the job anyway, I was pharmacy technician. I got the job anyway, but it was still like that deliberate sabotage to
Mhm.
prevent me from getting the job that would bring in more income to
Right.
allow me to be self-sufficient and not self-sufficient in the sense of, because I'm married. So in healthy marriage, it's not a matter of being self-sufficient. It's a matter of us together, we're building our home,
Right.
but sense of just having any sense of independence or any sense of income or ability to take care of myself outside of him,
Yeah.
he did that he could to sabotage it.
Right.
And so financially, even things like that can be a form of financial sabotage. Uh,
Mhm.
Purposely try to prevent you from getting promotion or obtaining a certain job position or any type of job position,
Right.
keep you dependent on them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Or if you're in a situation to where, sometimes people get married young or they gain a lot of um different financial like debt, financial resources, like all these things grow along with you as you are, getting older and having different experiences in life and things like that. And so, it could look like them denying assistance if they know how to manage or monitor those types of financial affairs and you don't know. They want to keep you in the dark about that so that as they are overseeing all of this, then they can control it all. And so, it can financial abuse can look like that as well, like keeping you in the dark about
Information.
yes, yes,
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The less you know, the better.
right.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then a last form of abuse that very few people think of, and it almost doesn't sound right saying the two words in the same sentence or same breath, if you will, but is spiritual abuse.
Hmm.
And that's, when you use a person's faith against them, whether you use their personal beliefs,
Right.
to manipulate and to gain control. Like one of the examples that we previously used was when we were talking about sexual abuse and it being used as a weapon, and how that some will say, well, the Bible says, that your body's not your own, and that, not to, it says defraud you not one another, and basically what it's saying is that you're not supposed to withhold sex from one another, you're not supposed to withhold that interaction. But obviously if there are unresolved issues, and obviously if you just got done, pushing me or cussing me out or whatever the situation may be, I'm not in the mood to deal with you that way, I'm not in the space to want to be with you that way. So then, that's where they would turn around and say, well, you're not supposed to, you're not supposed to withhold sex from me. Or, using, spiritual when we're talking about in terms of like the marriage bed not being defiled, because that's quote unquote scripture. So then, to try to use that as an excuse to bring in all kind of pornography and whatever else they feel like into the marriage bed, or if that person is in fact really legitimately controlling. But a lot of, husbands, will use the scripture, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands, you know, um, and there's a balance with that, because as he's the covering, he's the head of the home, he's the husband, there's tremendous responsibility that comes with that. That's no light thing. So it's not meant as an authoritative, I am man, you do what I say, I'm the dictator. That's not how that's meant. And unfortunately oftentimes and I've seen it so many times, unfortunately, in Christian homes, that's how that's used, and you have a lot of abuse just from those very words.
Right.
Wives themselves to your husbands, and husbands internalize that to mean you submit to me any way I tell you and however I tell you, and
Yeah.
you're out of work. No.
And God has not called us to live in a place of bondage.
No, he did not.
He did not call us to live in abuse. He didn't call us to live in a place of bondage. And when people have done the things that we're describing today and abused you, they've already broken that marital covenant. They've broken that covenant by doing things that are against what God's will is for you, whether it's a husband or a wife. Like it doesn't matter. Whoever has done this has broken the marital covenant, and so them holding that spiritual aspect over your head, after they've already broken the covenant and done things that you know God is not in agreement with, and God did not create you to endure. um that's why we can place those two words together, spiritual and abuse, because that's exactly what it is. They're trying at the very lowest of low, when it comes to your faith and when it comes to your desire to live for God, and um whatever it is that they are using against you in that aspect, that is sometimes people's only lifeline that they have left. It's their only hope, is that belief in that spiritual connection that they have with God. And so if they can break that down as well, by making you feel like you're a failure in that aspect as well, how much more control? Like God's not even okay with you because you're doing all this wrong. You've really only got me now. And so that is that is one of the most horrendous ways, I think, that people can abuse, just because of the fact that that's most likely the hope that they can hold on to, and you're twisting that as well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think about Malachi 2, chapter 2, verse 14. And although, in this particular verse, it's talking about the wife, but it's certainly applicable to the wife toward her husband as well. When God says, he has witnessed between, he says, I have been witness between you and the wife of your youth against whom you have dealt treacherously. And so he even tells, the children of Israel in Malachi that I have a problem with you. It says, I
Right.
have a problem, I have an issue, I have a problem with you because you're dealing treacherously with the wife of your youth. And again, in the Bible, it's speaking of the wife. However, biblically, spiritually, it's God doesn't ordain a woman mistreating a man either. So it
Right.
goes both ways. Just in this particular verse of scripture, he's referring to the husband in the way that he's
Mm.
treating the wife, and so that does away with the foolishness that it's godly and that you're to be subservient to your husband, and that
Right.
however he treats you, it's okay because he's the head of the house and he's the covering.
Yeah.
uh, God does not look favorably on you dealing treacherously with the wife, um, and treating her improperly or abusing her.
Right. A lot of people are experiencing, unfortunately, a lot of the different forms of abuse that we talked about today. And of course, the examples that we gave with these different forms of abuse, you can never get into every possible description of what those could look like, because unfortunately the list is entirely too long. But we wanted to touch on some of these things today. But if you find that you're in a place where you can identify with some of these things that we talked about today, and you can identify the fact that you've experienced some of these situations, some of these examples that we've given, and possibly more, um, we want you to know that you can have safety.
Oh,
Um, there are methods of getting safe, obtaining that safety. You deserve it.
mm,
We talked about how important your value is, like realizing your value, but also having peace and having safety. All of those things are for you. And so, if you need to talk to someone, that's often a great first step, is talking to someone that you trust, so that you can get support, you can brainstorm, you can try to find resources, you can help create a safety plan, because safety plans are really important. A lot of times people are in these situations and they're very dangerous, but one of the most dangerous times is when you're leaving, because they're
Yeah,
realizing that the control is gone. And so having the resources and having the safety plans and things like that can be very useful. Um, you can call 911, of course, if you're in immediate danger, and you can safely do that. You can also contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline in the United States. That's 1-800-799-7233, and they'll help support you and provide you with resources and that safety planning that we talked about. And we'll include that information in the notes version of the podcast. But I just wanted to touch on that. And of course, we're happy to talk with you and just, let you know that you're not alone. So if you wanted to reach out to us, you can reach us at the Real Podcast, Real Deal Heal at gmail.com. The link will be in the description of the podcast for that as well. And remember that anything that you look at, or any contacts that you make, can be found by an abuser. So make sure you're being smart and make sure you're being safe with how you're trying to look up resources and who you're contacting, so that it doesn't cause more danger for you.
as well as just even when you were speaking to the safety plan, you know, don't negate its importance. I think of a situation recently, and I shared it previously, of a lady that she's a friend of a friend's, and she and her husband were separated. He lured her back home, told her that he was going to get, he had some of her belongings to give to her, because she had moved out of their home. He had some of her belongings to give to her, told her that he would have them waiting in the van. She went back to the home, and when she went to the van to get her belongings, he literally just sprayed her with bullets. Got out of he was hiding inside of the van. So when she came close enough, he just started spraying her with bullets. When she fell to the ground, he got out of the car, shot her a few more times, and then took off running. And, had she have had a safety plan, had she have, no, drop the clothes off to me, meet in a public place, drop the clothes off to me in a library, or drop them off to me at the police station, or whatever the situation may have been.
Or even just leaving the clothes. If the
Yeah,
situation's dangerous enough, realizing that clothes can be replaced, but you
that
can't be.
that part, so, and I'm saying that to say, whatever the circumstance may be, being able to strategically map those things out. Is it like you just said, is it something to where I even need to go get the clothes? Or, do I, if I do I plan it this way? And it's better to plan ahead of time than to wait when you're in the heat of that moment. Because when you're dealing with situations like that, oftentimes, oftentimes it's not something that you're going to have the wherewithal in that moment to be able to properly think straight. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you're in a state. And so you're not going to be thinking properly to be able to know how to rightly assess the situation. So it's better to have that safety plan in place ahead of time so
Right.
that you can prayerfully be able to safely get out when it's necessary.
Yes. Yeah, and we will be touching more on some of these specifics and safety planning and things like that in our next podcast. So we look forward to talking with you more about this subject.
Absolutely. But in the meantime, we just want you to remember that you were fearfully and wonderfully made. You've been fashioned in the image of God. And as such, He did not ordain abuse. So don't ever let anyone gaslight you into believing that it's okay. Don't let anyone use scripture or use any form of spiritual abuse to convince you that it is okay and that you're wrong for getting out of it. It doesn't always mean that it has to end in divorce, but it does mean you need to get out of that situation until you can go to counseling and get the help that's needed. And we just pray that you all know your value, know that if God took the time to fashion you in His image, He certainly did not create you to be abused or to be a doormat and to be misused. And so don't hesitate to get out. Don't hesitate to find that place of safety. And one of the greatest places of safety is always remembering to keep it real,
so God can deal
and we
and
can
we can
heal.
heal.